Well, there's three views. The first is that it's post-millennial, that Jesus will come after the millennium. Matthew 24, verse 14, Jesus said the gospel will be preached to all of the world, and then he will come. And so some people reading that thought, the gospel is going to go to all the world. And finally, everybody will believe in Jesus, and evil will disappear for 1,000 years. And then Jesus will return, and he will judge the living and the dead. This was a belief and a theory about the millennium that was actually very popular before the First World War. Before the First World War. After the First World War, very few people thought the world was ever going to become a perfect place. So this particular one kind of fell out of favor. And what became more popular after the First War, and especially after the Second War, was something called premillennial, which is simply that Jesus would come before the 1,000-year reign. That he would come and establish a kingdom on earth that would reign for 1,000 years, and then after that would face the judgment. Which means, of course, that Jesus could return at any moment. But a third view kind of mixes up the two of them without really accepting either one. And it's kind of hard to know when that particular view became popular in writings, because sometimes it's hard to distinguish from the others. But we call it amillennial. It's simply that Jesus returns and then the judgment begins, and that there is, in a sense, no literal 1,000-year reign. That instead Jesus will return and the judgment will take place right away. And what this view would say is that the 1,000 years is simply a symbol for completing God's plan. Just like much of Revelation is a symbol for other things, it's a symbol for the completion of God's plan. That is, that it's the number 10, which is kind of a number of completeness, multiplied by itself 3 times. So kind of a trinity of tens, as it were. 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. And so an ultimate symbol for completeness, and we're kind of in the age of the church. And it's fulfilled. So that's basically the first of the debates about the millennium, and whether Jesus comes before, after, or even there actually is going to be a millennium. The second issue is really only an issue for those who hold the premillennial view, so the second of those views. And that is, if Jesus is coming before the millennial reign, will he come before or after the tribulation, a period of tribulation? Tribulation in Revelation 12 and 13 is a period of 7 years of intense turmoil and wars and persecution and suffering. Revelation 12 and 13, we read about the beast and the dragon making war against the woman of Israel. And in Matthew 24, Jesus talks about something that he calls the abomination that causes desolation. And it all sounds pretty awful about it, but really difficult times. And so the question is Jesus going to come before this horrible time or after this horrible time? And there's 2 views to that. One is that he will come before, which is called pre-tribulation. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17 talks about us being caught up in the air. So Jesus will take us up out of the world and spare the church the pain of going through all of this suffering and tribulation. But on the other side, there are those who say it's going to be post, that the church will actually go through tribulation, and then Jesus will return. And we remember passages like we read in Matthew 24, where Jesus warns us that there will be persecution and there will be hardship, so don't deny your faith. And so there is a belief that we will go through this period of tribulation. And that the caught up simply means that at the end of it all, we will be caught up with Christ, and then he will bring us back with him. So kind of all gathered together, and then come back with him to reign for 1,000 years. So 2 views of that. There is a mid-view that not very many hold, but it's also out there. Here's what I want to tell you. What you believe about these things will not make a bit of difference in what will actually happen. And it will not determine serving your place in the kingdom of heaven. God's going to do what God is going to do. And all of our arguments about what will happen will not change what God is going to do. So we know that someday Jesus will return. We know that someday Jesus will establish his kingdom. And we know that someday we will be held accountable for how we have lived. And we do not know when any of those somedays are or will be. That's eschatology. And you might think, well, if we don't really know any of the details, what's the point? It won't make any difference how it turns out, whether I believe one way or another. Is it going to make any difference how I live? What I'll say is, we don't know. But it should make a huge difference in the way we live. It should make a huge difference in the way we live. Revelation is the biggest book of eschatology. That would be what people would often go to when they were to look at last things. The point of Revelation is being written to a church that is under severe persecution, and John is writing Revelation. Jesus is giving the book of Revelation to a church that needs to be comforted and assured. So in the midst of suffering desperately for their faith, they needed to know that all of that suffering was worth it, because in the end, Jesus wins. So be faithful. It's the point of Revelation. Jesus' long discourse, Jesus' long talk in Matthew 24 makes a slightly different point. Jesus is concerned that we know what's coming, so it will impact how we live our daily lives, whether we're suffering or not. And it's actually an answer to that second of the summer supper questions. How do we prepare? How do we prepare? So let's look at what Jesus said. Jesus' talk is in Matthew 24 to 25. And it's really just giving some general details about the last days. This is the last week of Jesus' life. This is the time just before his crucifixion. And he's going out to the garden. And the disciples, as they are leaving the city to go out to the garden, look back at the city. And they see this beautiful, overwhelming image of the city. It's kind of like, I would imagine, if you saw Paris for the first time. Or if you, after living in the Maritimes and seeing our little hills, went and saw the Rockies for the first time. It just overwhelms them. And so they turn to Jesus and they say, isn't this beautiful? Isn't this impressive? And Jesus says, don't be impressed. It will all be destroyed. And Jesus is making a prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem, which would come in 70 AD. In that year, the Romans destroy the city. They tear the temple down until it's a pile of rubble. But the disciples, in their heads, are thinking, it's all going to be destroyed. What could destroy all of this? The only thing that could destroy all of this must be the end of time, the end of the world. And so they ask, when will this happen? What will be a sign of the end of the coming? Because in their minds, some total destruction that Jesus is describing is something that can only come at the very end of it all, when everything is destroyed. And the rest of Matthew 24 is really a mixture of two things. It's a mixture of both the destruction of Jerusalem that will come in 70 AD, but also the end time, the return of Christ. As Jesus really talks about both things. So he talks about them, he says there's going to be a period of suffering. There will be war, and rumors of war, and earthquakes, and false Christs, and persecutions, and people will stray away from their faith, and people will become more wicked, and the gospel will be spread about, he says at the very end. It's going to get bad and bad and bad, but the gospel is going to go everywhere. These, Jesus says in verse 8, will be birth pains. This will be birth pains, signs of the end. If you've ever been in labor, and I know about talking to half of you at least, the male half that is, but if you've been in labor, you know it lasts a long time. When we had our first child, he was a couple of weeks late, and so we had to have him induced, and the child was induced at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the doctor said to us, you'll have a baby by lunchtime. Well, the baby had other ideas. I don't think the doctor talked to the baby. Because the baby didn't come until 7:30 that night, and it was one of the longest days, I'm going to say, of our life, but probably my other half would have a different opinion. But that's it with labor pains. With labor pains, you know the baby is coming, but you don't know when. It's just signs of the coming, and that's Jesus' point here. It will be the birth pains. It'll be like, you know it's coming, but you still don't know when. The signs are, the end is coming someday. Jesus then goes on to describe a great period of turmoil. So you have suffering and then you have turmoil. A period that's even greater. And then many people would say that this turmoil period is the tribulation period. But it also, many would say, refers to what happened in 70 AD. He calls it the abomination of desolation, which is a carryover from the book of Daniel. And he says, don't go running after people who are going to say that they're the Christ who's coming. Don't be fooled, they're false prophets. When Jesus comes back, he says, everyone will know what it was, which is what the next section is. It's simply the second coming of Christ. Jesus will come, and all the world will know. There'll be a loud trumpet, people will gather, everyone will know what happens. This is what Jesus makes in these verses. But then he goes on to talk about what I invented this word. He talks about the unknowableness of the end. The unknowableness of it. And that means more than just no one knows yet when Jesus returns. It means no one can know. No one will ever know before it actually happens. And how do I know that? Because Jesus said it. Jesus said, no one knows. Only the Father knows. And Jesus even went as far as to say, I don't know when I will return. Only the Father knows. He actually compares it to the days of Noah. In Noah's day, he prepared for a flood because he was warned it was coming. He built a big boat, but no one else saw it coming. In fact, the rest of the world made fun of him for predicting that there would be a flood. And though Noah knew it was going to come, he did not know when it would come. He just kept preparing for it to come. And so Jesus says, don't be deceived by people who say it'll be this day or that day, because only God knows. Do you know what people were called in Jesus' day when they tried to do what only God can do? They were called blasphemers. Blasphemy is when you try to take the place of God. And no one knows except for God. So Jesus tells the disciples, be prepared, because you don't know when. And then he goes on and really tells them over and over and over again to be prepared. In chapter 24 to chapter 25, he tells 5 stories that make the same point every time. Be prepared. He tells the story of the house owner. He says if the house owner knew when the thief was coming, he would stay home to make sure he protected his stuff. He would be prepared for a thief if he knew when he was coming. But he doesn't know when he's coming. So he needs to be prepared. He talks about wise and wicked servants. Wise servants are faithful to their tasks. The wicked servants goof off while their master's away. And then their master comes back suddenly, and the goof-offs are caught in their wickedness. He talks about the 10 virgins. That's the reason I told that story to the kids, so you hear that story ahead of time. This is part of being prepared for the end. He talked about the 3 servants and the talents. This was a story that Marilyn actually told quite a bit last week. There were 3 servants. If you remember, the first got 5 talents, the second got 2 talents, and then one got 1 talent. The first 2 servants used their talents and gained more talents, but the third one buried his and did nothing. And then when the master comes back and there's an accounting, the first 2 are rewarded, the third is thrown out into the outer darkness. And then finally, the sheep and the goats, the parable that we just read. It's the parable of the end of time. And the common theme is simply this: you need to be prepared. Well, why did Jesus tell these things to his disciples? Matthew 24:25, Jesus says, I have told you these things ahead of time. Why does he tell us to us? He tells it to us because you will never know when it's going to happen. You will be surprised. He doesn't want us to know the details. He's not trying to give us clues that we can figure out a puzzle. In fact, he says it's useless to do that. Jesus says, I'm not trying to give you a timetable, but I want you to have the right attitude, and I want you to have the right character, and I want you to be prepared. He actually spends 31 verses talking about what will happen, and 61 telling us to get prepared, and how we should live like it. Out of all of that, I think we learn that the most important thing about prophecy is it's about now. That prophecy, even prophecy about the future, is not about the future, it's about how we live life in the present. Prophecy about the future is about life in the present. All prophecy is like that. You remember all of those Old Testament prophets, and they were talking about what was coming. It was so that God's people changed their ways now, so that they wouldn't be unprepared when troubled times came. And so it's the same for eschatology. It should impact how we live now. And I want to suggest four. There's lots of other things, but four things. First of all, I think it's a reason for godly life. A reason for godly life. Students are back to school this week. They're getting into their first classes. University students are getting their first assignments and tests, and the due dates for all of those things. I remember when I was taking Greek in university, there was a test, you knew it, a test, a quiz every day. It was a vocabulary test. Now the thing is, you had a new lesson every day and a new set of vocabulary words, but you never knew which words were going to be on the test. And it wasn't always just the words for that lesson. My prof said, you should know every word that we have ever done so far, up to this point. And so any word from the beginning, in January, any word from the beginning of September to January could have been on the test. And so you had to know them all. You had to learn the lessons and keep them with you so that you were always prepared for the test that was going to come. Jesus says, you know that you're going to be held accountable for your actions. Therefore, you should always live your life, all of your life, in a way that is keeping with God's plans and God's instructions for that life. In the parable of the wise and the wicked servants, they didn't know when their master was going to return. So the wise servants lived every day as if the master was right there watching and ready to meet them on that very day. While the foolish servants said, well, he's not going to be home today, I can do whatever I want. I can goof off, I can mistreat my fellow servants. And Jesus warns the disciples in that story, persecutions are coming, people are going to stray, they're going to leave the faith, but the Christian, the person who's a follower of Christ, needs to be prepared to live as a follower of Christ. And so it's a reason for godly life. Godly life is about now, how we live now. That's why this prophecy, end times, of the future is about living life in the present. It's also, secondly, I think, a reason for a hopeful life. It's a reason not to be discouraged. We live with a conviction that God has the future in his hands. We know how it's going to turn out. Matthew 24, verses 10 to 12, Jesus says, some who love God will have their love for God grow cold because faith gets difficult. Some will turn away because it's not easy anymore. You don't need to be those people, he says to his disciples. He says to us. You don't need to have a gloomy or a pessimistic attitude. You can be hopeful because you know that the ultimate outcome is that Jesus wins. God wins. And so we can be hopeful because we know that history is moving forward, that it has purpose, that history is not just a circle and a circle and a circle. Nothing is meaning and everything is meaningless, but instead that there is meaning. We can even have hope for those who have passed away. The book of Thessalonians is also another book that talks about end times. Because they were sitting around wondering, when's the end going to be? Paul had talked about it. And then the people who were passing away and dying, they thought they're going to miss it when Jesus comes back. What happens to them? Paul says to them, we have hope, and those who have gone before us, they get to meet Jesus first. Matthew 24, verses 35, Jesus says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. We have hope. We have certainty. We have purpose. Because we have hope, what we know about the future can affect how we live now in this present. Because we can live with hope. We also have a reason for a prepared life. A prepared life. We know there's a day of judgment coming. We know that there's a day when we will be held accountable. And so we prepare. But a month ago, we discovered water in our basement. I discovered water in our basement. We have a boarder living with us this year, and so we were preparing the room, and then I noticed along the wall there was a little bit of water. It was wet. And I did some further investigation. At first I thought it was the water heater, the heater in the room, that was leaking, and then I called somebody in, and they said, no, it's not that. So then we had to rip the whole wall out, and we discovered there's a crack in the foundation of the wall. So I had to call somebody in, come fix the crack, and then I had to put in new insulation and put the wall all back together and paint it all up. And by the end of it, all said and done, this is somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500. All the bills are coming in, which is not in my budget, by the way. I had actually a whole bunch of other projects I wanted to get done. Finance people will tell you that in your budgeting, in your planning, you should have what they call an emergency fund, which is typically about 3 months' income, so that if you lose all your income, you have something to live on for a little while until you figure out how to get it back. An emergency fund. And they also typically tell you that you should expect to spend at least 1% of the value of your house on maintenance every year. So if your house is worth $100,000, then you should expect to put about $1,000 in maintenance every year. Budget, an emergency fund, planning for maintenance. These are all things that you put in place because you know these things are going to happen. You know someday you're going to have to fix a roof. You might not know there's going to be a crack in the basement, but you know there's probably going to be someday you have to fix a wall or do something else. And so you prepare for these things that you know are going to come, even though you don't know when they might actually happen. Essentially, all the 5 parables that Jesus told were about being prepared. By the way, I did have an emergency fund, so that's what's paid for. Now I got to put it back into an emergency fund, right? In those first 3, Jesus especially says, you don't know when, but be prepared. And a prepared heart is a heart that needs to be right with God. You know you're going to be held accountable for your actions that you need to make sure that you get right with God all the time. William Barclay tells a story about a devil who was training 3 apprentice devils. I think you probably got this story from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote a book about that as well. His is a much shorter story. Barclay says, the devil asked his apprentice, how are you going to ruin mankind? How are you going to make things so it goes badly for all of mankind? And the first apprentice says, well, I'm going to tell them that there is no God. And the devil says, no, that's not going to work. People know there is a God. They won't be fooled with that. The second one says, well, I'm going to tell them that there's no hell. And the devil says, well, a lot of them are already living through hell now. They know that there's a hell. They know that there's going to be punishment. The third one said, I'm going to tell them there's no herd. There's no herd. The devil said, you will send thousands to their ruin. Because that's the greatest illusion. That there's always more time. That there's always lots of time. Michael Wilkins said, you should live as if Jesus is coming back today. And plan as if he's not coming back for 100 years. Live as if he's coming back today. But plan as if he's not coming back for 100 years. Be prepared. Live a prepared life. Because it's about now. Not just about the future. It's about now. Live a prepared life. You might ask yourself, well, how do I live prepared? And I think Jesus would say, you live prepared by living a passionate life. A passionate life. In that parable of the talents, who were the prepared servants? Not the guy who was sitting around doing nothing, waiting for his master to come back. The prepared servants were the two servants who went out and were using their talents and working hard to gain more rewards for their master. And if nothing else, the parable of the talents tells us that Jesus doesn't want us just sitting around, staring at the sky, waiting for him to come. He wants us to be at work for him. Being prepared means going out and doing our work as we share hope with the world. Parable of the sheep and the goats. Jesus doesn't commend those who do nothing and ignore the needs of the world. He commends those who are at work to help others. He encourages compassion and activity to save people. Jesus is trying to battle our tendency to be complacent. If we really believe that Jesus is coming, then that conviction should fuel our involvement in Jesus' mission, in evangelism, in church planting, in church growth, in meeting the needs of others, in compassion. If we really believe that people's souls are at stake, we'll do more than just study and be fascinated by what will happen at the end of time. We'll be working now to help people be prepared for it. If you have a passion about something, you can help talk about it and be involved in it. Chapter 24, verse 14, he says, at the end of it all will be doom and gloom and war and earthquakes and wickedness. But then Jesus says this, and this gospel of the kingdom we preach to the whole world as a testimony. It doesn't matter to me if you're pre, post, or all millennial. Or if you're pre, post, or mid-tribulation. It matters is if you know what matters to Jesus. It matters is if your faith is shaping your everyday life and if you are ready for whatever. If you are ready for Jesus today to come, if you're ready for Jesus to not come for 100 years and you can live your life faithfully to him. Knowing about the end should make us passionate for the present. Because what we think and believe about the future affects our life in the present. Luke 18, Jesus asks a question. It's an ominous question. However, he says, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? We know Jesus is coming. So we have every reason to live a godly life. We have every reason to live a life that is hopeful. We have every reason to always be prepared and every reason to live passionately the way he's called us. To be faithful. The question for us is really not, when will Jesus return? It could be any time. The question for us is, when Jesus comes, whenever, will he find me faithful? Will he find me faithful? Let us pray. Our Father and our God, we thank you this day for the love of your love brought your Son among us to die in our place so that we might indeed be ready for when he comes again. We look forward and anticipate, Lord, your coming, whether it be in the next moment, many, many years from now. We ask, Lord, simply that you would help us to prepare our lives, prepare our lives, to be faithful as we serve you. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.